Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk today about China's soft power in Central Asia. I mean, I guess all of you know that China has been trying for at least 10 years now to gain more and more influence in Central Asia, and it has been doing that not only through hard power but also through soft power. And in this presentation, I will use the term of soft power as it has been defined by Joseph Nye. That is, I quote, the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payments, or in a way to win the hearts and minds. And I will confront this definition to how soft power is sought by China in Central Asia. So I will have three main points. First, what is China's soft power? Second one, how is that manifested? How is that materialized in Central Asia? And the main question actually is it working? So for more than a decade, the Chinese government and Chinese scholars have been elaborating on what should be the Chinese soft power. And as in any other country, in China, soft power is a contested concept. I don't have time, of course, to elaborate a lot on that, but three main points are very regularly mentioned in Chinese official speeches and in Chinese expert analysis on the strategic importance of Chinese soft power. First, that soft power might be critical to achieving long-term strategic success in a world where the USA wields overwhelming military power. The second is that soft power enhances Chinese aspiration to become natural leader of the developing world. And third, that Chinese leaders understand that they need to counter fears of China as a new superpower, especially in neighboring Asian countries and especially in Central Asia. So how does this Chinese soft power materialize in Central Asia? China has used three main tools: political, economic, and cultural. Let me start with political one. This political tool consists first and foremost in promoting values that are different from those advocated by the West, such as civilizational diversity, harmony and prosperity, respect for sovereignty, and non-ideological relations. In contrast to the perceived Western values of liberal democracies, freedom, human rights, and the right to protest. So, I mean, this is of course not specific to China, Russia, or even Malaysia or Singapore. I've been doing that since the 1990s. But what is interesting is that this approach has meant a little bit more than non-interference in the civilizational diversity or domestic affairs. This has actually materialized in support of authoritarian regimes in the region. And this has been done in various ways. First, by adapting or mimicking democratic forms that in many ways serve as the mirror image of democratic soft power. It includes, for example, zombie election monitoring. For example, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, has sent purported monitors to polls across Eurasia and have endorsed fraudulent elections with the aim of clouding the assessments made by established monitoring organizations such as the OSCE. Second, by challenging political changes, especially like the color revolutions. China has devoted a lot of attention to the concept of color revolutions, which are viewed a new form of warfare invented by Western governments trying to remove independently minded national governments in favor of ones controlled by the West. And this is also done by through parliamentary exchanges between Chinese and Central Asian politicians. The second tool is the economic instrument. And there are two possible approaches to this end. First, by advertising the success of the Chinese development model as a kind of superior achievement to anything that the USA or its allies could offer. So this Beijing consensus is presented as an antithesis of the Washington consensus. I mean, it would not believe in uniform solutions for every situation. It would not favor one big shock therapy leap, but instead it would emphasize development based on the country's own characteristics. And two, this economic tool means engaging in economic diplomacy through aid and investments. And here, it's interesting to see that Chinese approach of soft power is actually broader than Joseph Nee's one. No, Joseph Nee's, at least originally, excluded investment and aid. And China has, as you know, invested a lot of money in Central Asia, enabling recipient governments to sidestep the standards sometimes of transparency and accountability required by the established international financial institutions. And finally, some projects with a fundamentally economic development are also expected to show to Central Asian people and governments that China's contribution to local economic development. And here, of course, one of the best examples is the OBO, which is here to show the economic power of China, but also its contribution to what China views as a future prosperity of the region. And last tool, last instrument is cultural. So, for example, you have you have thousands of Central Asian students in China. I mean, something like 10,000 Kyrgyz students and 13,000 Kazakh students studying now in China. China is also sponsoring some Chinese departments in Central Asian university. A relatively new phenomenon is that China is opening some Chinese schools in Central Asia. I mean, it opened a Chinese school in Bishkek, and it's intending to open a Shanghai International School in Tashkent this year. Another, of course, very, very important element is a Confucius Institute, which are trying to reach a wider audience. And we have about 15 Confucius Institutes now in Central Asia. China is also trying to have an influence through CCTV. I mean, I'm not talking about monitoring camera. I'm talking about Chinese Chinese TV and through the Xinhua news agency. And China is also sponsoring exhibitions on China, sponsoring conferences, even books on China written sometimes by local scholars. So, considering all these initiatives, is China winning the hearts and minds of Central Asian people? And here is one, I think, one of the Chinese government's main mistakes. I mean, counting is not enough. The fact is that discussions on the soft power of China, like, by the way, those of American soft power, generally treat it as empirical question. So rather than counting, for example, bombs and bullets as it is done with hard power, analysts measures expansion of China's global media platforms, or, for example, the growing number of Confucius Institute. I'm not saying, of course, that these metrics are useless, but they do not tell us much, actually, about the message China's target audience have absorbed, whether views actually have changed, or the density of views. Why? Because soft power is not only a material entity that can be measured, it is more a social construction. And this has, of course, a huge impact on how the soft power is perceived in Central Asia. So, for example, is Chinese economic involvement convincing in Central Asia? What we see is that you have plenty of narratives were worrying about China's economic involvement in the region. People complain, for example, that even if China says a lot about its investment, details over these investments are deliberately kept vague. Another example is that some of these economic tools can be, in a way, counterproductive. And to illustrate this, the scale and huge investments supposed to be brought to Central Asia by the war and presented by China as an exceptional way to bring the region to prosperity is seen as turning the region into a vast transit corridor, opening up the country's rich resources for exploitation by China, and making the countries a kind of dumping grounds for China's surplus production, and more generally, making all the region a vassal of China's economic expansion. Very briefly, because I will have to finish, but the impact of Chinese culture too remains very limited in Central Asia. For sure, there are more and more Confucius institutes or more and more Central Asian students studying in China. But Central Asian youth seems extremely interested in learning Chinese, so that's sure, but not necessarily in learning about China. And the growing number of students in China does not mean that these students love China, but rather that they see it as a tool for their job and their business. And you add to that, I really don't have time to elaborate on that today, but you have plenty of phobias on China, of growing phobias on China in Central Asia. So, conclusion. The question, so is China attractive? Yes, I mean, that's very important. I'm not saying, I don't want to say in my presentation today that China is systematically viewed in a negative way. No. For many people, China is a way to find a job, it's a way to make money, to start, for example, a company, especially for young people. It can also be viewed as a counterbalance to the growing influence of Russia or to the influence of Western countries that many Central Asians are disappointed about. Now, is this attraction soft power? At least according to Joseph Nee's concept, in winning the hearts and minds of people, I think we have to remain much, much more cautious. And there are at least 3 obstacles to China's soft power in the region. First, for sure, xenophobic reactions I was talking about occur not only in Central Asia. I mean, you have that in most of countries where China is investing. You have plenty of reactions like that, for example, in Africa. But the difference is that in Central Asia, the territorial contiguity of 3 states with China, I think combined with the state's low demography, significantly increase the phobias. The second point is that the materialization of the Chinese soft power is considerably different from that proposed by Joseph Nee, in the sense that Chinese soft power is almost exclusively exercised by the state and the state structures. And a fundamental element of Joseph Nee's soft power is that it must not come only from norms established by the state, but also by civil society and by non-state actors. So the authoritarianism of the Chinese power considerably reduces the capacity to develop its soft power. And this is all the more important, I think, that despite admiration of a part of the population for Chinese economic success, many Central Asia do not admire the Chinese political system. And last point, the Chinese government lies like proxies in the region. The main allies are actually local allies, are local political elites, and those who make profits on Chinese business. But these elites and their so-called sinophilia are not necessarily far from that accepted by the rest of the population. And beyond these elites, these Central Asian elites, intermediaries to promote a positive image of China remain very limited. For example, the field of sinology in Central Asia remains extremely limited. Even the specialists Central Asian specialists on China are not necessarily sinophile. And second, because many people who are working with Chinese, for example, traders, are not necessarily sinophile either. So does that mean that China's soft power is destined to fail? No, I mean, I'm not saying that, but China is still facing many issues, and just like any other country, Beijing will have to deal with a real marketplace of ideas, of influences. For example, growing nationalism in Central Asia, the appeal of Western norms, the remaining effects of Soviet norms and mindsets, and Russia's resurgent media space and soft power. So I think that China still has a long way to go to gain a real influence in terms of soft power in the region. Thank you.